Poštovani gledaoci, u pripremi za presudu Ratku Mladiću razgovaramo s ljudima koji su bili povezani sa slučajevima u Međunarodnom sudu za bivšu Jugoslaviju u Hagu. Jedan od njih je Sir Geoffrey Nice, koji je bio jedan od glavnih tužilaca, ali ono što je bilo ključno, bio je tužilac u slučaju Milošević, koji je direktno povezan sa slučajevima Karadžić i Mladić, ali i nakon toga se bavi svim ovim slučajevima. Sir Geoffrey, welcome to program N1.
Good evening.
Let me start this conversation not with Ratku Mladić, but with Radovan Karadžić. He's just moved to United Kingdom, and many say that he ended up in a very bad prison on the Isle of Wight. And some here in the Balkans have claimed that the mechanism intentionally put him there to be away from his family, to be in a bad situation, to be among very bad people. What is your reaction? Because you send so many people to British prisons, and if anyone knows the British prison system, you know it.
I don't actually. It's a long time since I've been to see anyone in a prison. I barely know how they differ one from the other, so I'm afraid I can't help you with that question. I suspect they're all pretty nasty because we have far too many people in prisons, and they're not funded on a very generous basis, not in the way that some prisons in Norway are, in a both generously funded and progressive way. So I dare say Karadžić will have a pretty miserable time in whatever prison he lands up. But I can't help you with the details.
But Sir Geoffrey, when we are speaking about case against Ratku Mladić, the appeal judgment is coming very, very soon. What is your expectation from that case, and what we should expect from the appeal judgment?
I have no expectation of the appeal judgment. I don't know any of the judges, and even if I did, and even if I knew anything about what was coming, I wouldn't really be able to say it, but I actually don't know anything. It's obviously going to be a very important judgment in that it will, to some extent, close the door on history, or will it? The door's already closed, I'm afraid. Your viewers won't like me saying this, but Bosnia, the Yugoslav wars, they're history. Nobody's very interested anymore. So the Ratku Mladić verdict by the appeals chamber will get a mention somewhere, probably on the front page, but quite possibly not even on the front page of newspapers. You are, to that extent, history. Will it close the door? It depends. If the verdict is satisfactory from the institution's point of view, so it confirms the appeal chamber verdict, the trial chamber verdict, yes, it'll probably close the door a bit. If it does something exciting, like, not exciting, different, like go back in time for genocide, that will be hugely interesting to those who still follow the history of those wars. Of course, if it were to be acquitted of genocide, that would be startling. Looking at the possibility of its going back to an earlier date for the start of genocide, which I understand, but only anecdotally, people in the prosecutor's office may have been hoping would happen, or even the prosecutor himself, or the last prosecutor himself. If it went back earlier in time, before July of 1995, then that would be a very interesting circumstance. First, for what it might show about the reliability of other judgments in the ICTY and the ICJ that have limited genocide to just a short period of time in 95. What it might show about pressure on the court, I suppose, to have narrowed down those earlier verdicts. What it might show about the real responsibility of countries such as my own, United Kingdom, in refusing point blank ever to allow the word genocide to characterize what was happening in Eastern Bosnia. It would vindicate someone like Diego Aria from Venezuela, who said that this was a slow motion genocide when he managed to get into the enclave a couple of years before Srebrenica happened. So either nothing very much, complete disturbing if there was an acquittal for genocide, very disruptive if there was a determination of earlier genocide. And here, of course, you've got what may be a live problem for Bosnia. Again, it's of no interest to anyone else at the moment. And that is the revision of the ICJ judgment. Now, I gather that Nana Trump delivered a bit of a bombshell somewhere a day or so ago, revealing how Bakir Izetbegovic had declined an opportunity to resubmit his document to the ICJ within a 48-hour deadline, knowing full well how he could have done it via the ambassador. Extraordinary. And if there's any current interest in that failure by Izetbegovic, if there's any remaining interest in trying to improve the record of genocide generally on a state against state basis, then obviously any decision about an earlier start time for genocide in the Mladić appeals judgment could be very important.
So Geoffrey, many here are afraid of a particular person in this appeal chamber that's a presiding judge, because she was a judge in the Tolimir case, and she was dissenting in the Tolimir case, and she wrote some very interesting opinions about Ratku Mladić. In one element of her dissent, she wrote that during the meeting at the Fontana Hotel, she hasn't seen anything bad of behavior towards the people who came to meet Mladić, that he gave them to eat and drink and have a cigarette, and then he spoke with them over there. And she also says that the people who committed genocide were just a small group of people who acted away from command channels and command line. Should we be afraid of a situation like that if we have a presiding judge expressing opinions like that on the appeal in this case, which is exceptionally related to the Tolimir case?
Well, if you're afraid or worried about it, there's nothing I can do to help you. I don't know the judge personally, and I haven't read this passage of her argumentation in another case. I must say, I think such a view of the recorded events in the Fontana Hotel would be pretty well out of line with everyone else's, because many people would say fear is embedded in the video screen whenever you watch it. And equally, any decision or view that genocide was the act of a very limited number of people might or might not bear examination if you looking for leadership genocide or genocide within the thinking of the leadership. But you don't need to read very widely about other atrocities to know how critical is and are the roles of all others. And there's plenty of evidence of the others' involvement in events around Srebrenica. You only have to look at that appalling footage of the 6 young chaps who were murdered much later on, after a month or so, in Turnovo, wasn't it, I think?
You're talking about Scorpion?
Yeah, the Scorpions, that's right. Yes, I put that, I was the first person to put that into evidence. It never made it into evidence, but I put it into the tribunal. If you look at those offenders, whatever they were charged with eventually in Belgrade, it would be quite easy to see that they were not people who didn't have a pretty wicked state of mind. So it'd be interesting to see what she says. But there's not much point in worrying in advance. You'll just have to wait until next Tuesday.
Sir Geoffrey, there is only one more case left to be finished before the final door is shut on the mechanism now by the ICTY. That's a Simatovic and Stanisic case, which is, as my friend and colleague Julian Borges says, probably the longest court case in history because it runs for so many years. But that case would be very important when it comes to Serbia. How much attention should we pay to that judgment if ever happens, the final judgment in that case?
I don't know enough about that one, I'm afraid. You must understand, I don't follow these things very closely. How can I? I've got a life to lead and other things to do. All I would say about the Stanisic and Simatovic case is that whatever the verdict, I have a sneaking suspicion there's a great deal more that might be revealed by the state documents of countries that might have been working in some way together with those two men, one in particular. And I don't know to what extent that emerged in the evidence in his trial. But the whole business about Bosnia's suffering at the hands of Serbia, as you would allege and many would agree with you, happened on a substantial scale. I don't know how I started that sentence, but a great deal has yet to emerge about the involvement of the so-called Western states that were supposedly protecting you. I have little doubt that Srebrenica itself was involved much more, either by way of knowledge or by way of some complicity on the part of countries such as my own. You will have seen Hub Jasper's film, presumably. Have you? Yeah, and the documents he reveals there, and it's very hard not to see those documents as indicating that Srebrenica was abandoned quite consciously, but privately, abandoned without regard either to the Bosnians, of course, or to the Dutch-backed troops. Now, those documents have never fallen, as far as I know, for careful examination by a court in some kind of judicial process. I find Hub Jasper's film completely compelling. And Verhoeven, the Dutch defense minister, obviously did, because to some degree it exculpates the Netherlands. But it still hasn't been properly examined. Why hasn't it been examined? Why hasn't the presidency of your country been doing what it should have been doing as opposed to sitting on its hands? The reason you haven't got or haven't had a further exploration of the 2007 ICJ judgment is because you all did nothing. I mean, I say you all. Your leaders did nothing, and there was inadequate pressure from below in any coordinated way to force them to do something. And then what Izetbegovic did at the very end of 16 and beginning of 17 looks for all the world like cover-up of his own inactivity, but that doesn't excuse the rest of you. These materials were out there for you all to see. For example, you may remember the Supreme Defense Council records, which everybody was so excited about because they were blacked out, pursuant to a deal between Del Ponte and Belgrade. We could see them, we could read them, I could read them, Nina Trump could read them, we could see what they showed, but they weren't made available to the public, and the public was terribly excited. Then a couple of years later, they were produced in the Perisic trial. I think nobody read them. So I'm afraid one of the things about suffering, as no doubt your people have suffered and terribly badly, is that you can't expect others to shoulder the responsibility of putting it right all on their own. You have to do something of it yourself, not least because people will forget you. And Bosnia is forgotten. Other tragedies have intervened, and therefore you're not going to get any much attention from outside or help. And Nana Trump, for example, and I, we tried to help, but we were thwarted by whatever was going on in Izetbegović's office. And that's it, really. We're not doing any more since then. We haven't been asked to do any more since then.
So, Geoffrey, may I ask you something? You just mentioned the other cases which are emerging, and we know we are talking about Rohingya Muslims and Uyghurs in China, and we are also talking about all other cases, Syria and others. Should we expect to see similar courts or tribunals to be set up in the future? Is that the way how to deal with atrocities like this? And for how long we will see repetition of these atrocities around the world on almost a similar basis of ethnicity, religion, or just being minority in one country?
I think probably forever. I don't think there's much chance of, I'm completely pessimistic about us really learning to stop. Some people take a different view. There's a philosopher called Steven Pinker who thinks that things are getting a bit better overall and that we're killing slightly less people than we used to in these atrocities. But I rather agree with the implication of your question that they do carry on and they aren't stopped. I can't speak about the Uyghurs because I'm chairing the Uyghur Tribunal that starts its work on Fridays and is an informal tribunal. And why is it being dealt with by an informal people's tribunal? Because there is no court of any kind to which the problems there can be taken for different reasons. So when you ask the question, do I think any similar court similar to the ad hoc tribunal for the former Yugoslavia or Rwanda? Or do I think that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, will expand its jurisdiction so that all these problems can fall in and that there will be enough money to fund it? I'm afraid the answer is no, I don't. I think we live in a very, very troubling time. Two things you can really ask yourself, and your viewers can ask themselves. The first is whether the concept of a single humanity, which various religions might support, as well as people who have no religion at all, but are of a generally well-intentioned humanitarian nature. Do we see ourselves as the brothers and sisters of people the other side of the world who may be suffering most awfully? Don't think so. Because if we did, we wouldn't allow these things to go on. And then if you look at the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, said to be universal human rights, the declaration not being binding on anyone, it's just a statement of things that people believe in. Just read through the first 13 articles and look around the world a bit and ask how many of them are being dishonored all the time. So the world you live in is not the world of a world order that's developing necessarily and doing better. Maybe a world order that never really existed and is now being shown up. Because if you're not your brother's keeper, if your brother is the far side of the world, just as much as if he's in Montenegro or Croatia or Albania, if he's your brother and you're his keeper, no, that doesn't. You would perhaps stop buying his computers and his phones. And if you had the money, you wouldn't be thinking of going on holiday there, for example. Yeah, troubling world. So the long answer, but I don't think you'll have more courts.
So Geoffrey Nice, thank you so very much for your time.
Not at all.
Poštovani gledalci, bio ovo razgovor sa Sir Geoffrey Niceom. Razgovarali smo o slučajevima Ratka Mladića, Radovana Karadžića, ali i međunarodnoj pravdi. Ostanite uz program N1. Doviđenja.